We as photographers have chosen to operate in a field that is limited in many ways. So it's best to be aware of what these limitations are in order to maximize the possibilities for self-expression. Our awareness of these limitations is important in order to have the freedom to create. Photography can suggest a story or narrative, but it's impossible for it to provide much beyond the basic information. The picture story photographers at Life and Post tried their best to combine their pictures into something that resembled a narration or story, but it was always just a sophisticated improvement on the photo comic book. A picture can describe, but without an extensive caption, it explains very little. Look at this photograph taken during the 19th century. We can guess why this family wanted to pose around the organ, but without an extensive caption, we are left confused. I'm going to talk about 4 tools that emerge out of the limitations associated with photography. During this video, I've drawn heavily on a lecture by Stephen Shaw presented at the Photographers Gallery in 2010.
They say that the camera never lies, but it can stretch the...
So you as an individual photographer have your ideas, your influences and motives, and you're working with the photographic medium in order to produce photographs that communicate something. But you realize that you are dealing with an incomplete mode of communication. Unlike painters who start with an empty canvas and decide what to add to the painting, you are starting with the whole world, and through your choices you bring order to a scene. Your really basic starting point is, why am I taking a photograph? You might want to say, I saw this thing and I want to show it to you. Or I photographed something and this is my interpretation of it, or my work of art. Or it could be, I'm feeling such and such in this situation and I want to communicate that emotion to you. Or lastly, if you are delving into the conceptual arena, then you might be saying, I'm photographing this scene in order to make a commentary on the process of photography itself. It could also be a combination of any of these. In this video clip, Stephen Shaw talks about the reasons why he took this photograph.
On these trips I was making, I found I could explore both North American culture and explore photography at the same time. That the two were united. And so in terms of the transformations I talked about before, I'm thinking about the relationship of the lamppost on the right to the edge of the building, to the eave of the building, and how it appears when flattened onto the picture plane. At the same time, I'm thinking about how this New England industrial town ends. Here, this street marks the end of the town, and the countryside begins. And I'm interested in this transition.
So let's continue with this photograph. Did Shaw show us what the scene looks like? Yes, okay, tick that box. Shaw has definitely created his own interpretation of the scene. Tick that second box. When you delve a bit deeper into the scene, you get the feeling that there's a sense of isolation or vulnerability. So tick the emotion box. Lastly, he spoke about his awareness of the visual elements. So tick the box that deals with someone who's examining the process of photography itself. Shaw also says that a photograph is solved more than it is composed. What that means is that photographers use form and structure as a way of bringing meaning to the content of a photograph. This operates in the same way that grammar brings meaning to words. These 5 words, cat, that, a, great, and is, become more useful or become transformed into a better communication when we apply grammar. That is a great cat actually says something. So in order to solve a composition, as Shaw said, we need to understand the limitations of photography itself. The medium's incompleteness is the key to its uniqueness. And it's through this understanding that photographers are able to create poetic commentaries out of visual fragments. There are 4 basic limitations to photography that each contain the seed for creative expression. The first is the flatness of the photograph. Photographers are operating in a 3-dimensional world, and they have to reduce that information down to 2 dimensions. What this characteristic of photography does is create relationships between the elements within the frame that don't necessarily exist in the real world. It's not that I'm saying they're manufactured, it's just that by squashing the information down onto a flat plane, the relationships between things become emphasized. So a photographer can utilize this unique characteristic. Like in poetry, we can place visual elements in a particular manner that communicates something specific. Where you stand and what lens you choose will determine how these elements speak to each other. Through layering, one is able to produce a complex network of these relationships. Look at these shots by Lee Friedlander and see how he's placed elements within the frame in order to create juxtapositions that are not only visually interesting, but they also say something about the society that we live in. The frame is the beginning of every composition, the basis of the picture's structure and geometry. We can hint at what lies beyond this boundary, but the information within the frame is all that the viewer will be able to engage with. Sometimes we can emphasize the presence of the frame by making all of the elements refer back to the rectangular shape. In this image by Stephen Shaw, all of the signage and the uprights are referring back to the surrounding shape. We can also use the frame to challenge viewers' perceptions. So the viewer's brain adds information happening beyond the frame. Like in this famous image of Kappa, we fill in information about the person who shot this man and where he's falling, as well as possibly a war trench scene. So in the same way that the flatness limitation operates, the frame also creates relationships that don't necessarily exist, because we as photographers are drawing the viewer's attention to certain aspects of the photograph by making choices about how we group the details. Just a very slight shift in framing can radically alter the meaning of a picture. The third limitation that photographers have to deal with is time. We are choosing to capture one moment within the flow of time. So, unlike movies, the still image can only suggest time. We can do things like freezing mid-motion, that is, stopping the flow of time in a mid-action. Gary Winogrand has frozen a particular moment in order to communicate something. He's created photographs that refer to time, but the images become unshackled from the flow of time. We now have a material photograph that we can look at and study and appreciate it without it being just a fleeting moment. time can also be shown to be still. If we showed these photographs to someone from another planet, they would probably think that our world is like a static museum exhibit, or that it's been fixed like the people of Pompeii. Time can be insinuated through movement. Alexei Titarenko exploited this technique brilliantly in his City of Shadows series. The last tool or limitation is focus. There's no actual plane of focus in the world. Photographers are choosing a particular plane to prioritize over all the others, whereas the painter can produce all the facets of their image in focus. As photographers, we are relying on how the viewer's brain operates. When we view a flat image, our eye-brain system compensates for the variations of focus. If you drift through this photograph from bottom to top, you'll notice how the eye and the brain are reading the image in 3 dimensions. We are trying to adjust focus as we shift gaze, so it gives a sensation of moving through a 3-dimensional mental space. Group F64 in the 1930s attempted to counter the effects of this photographic limitation by maximizing their depth of field. MoMA's photography director John Sikowski said, well, actually he didn't say it exactly like this, so I'm paraphrasing. Photography is like pointing, but to transform an image into an artwork depends on how the photographer has created patterns from their chosen elements. I think I'll leave the subject here, but I hope that it's given you something to chew on. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.